you. I thought it was quite, fitting.
Where'd you get the beret?
Spain.
That's a strange place to get a beret.
No, it's a Basque beret. It's like from the Pyrenees.
Oh,
yeah, it's the beret center of the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what sort of student you were like when you were at school?
I think early on in my school life, I was a horrible student. Quite poorly behaved. Quite a bit of trouble for the teacher. Wasn't necessarily particularly studious. And I think I got distracted very easily, distracted others very easily, until I kind of came into my own later in high school, and I started to realize that there was information in study that I wanted, and that the more I put into it, the more I would gain, and it would be a benefit, not a burden. So I think by the time I kind of turned that year 9, year 10 corner, I think I was probably a pretty good student. Yeah.
So when kids misbehave in your class, do you think you're more sympathetic to them because you see themselves?
I think I do see myself in them, particularly in the younger kind of middle school years. I think that I can empathise a lot with those students that struggle to stay focused, to stay on task, to understand what the expectations of them are. I think I have a lot of empathy for them, yeah.
So what were you like in regards to Judaism and Zionism when you were a kid?
I was always very interested. I always had a few kind of areas that I was interested in. Judaism was one of them, history was another, and I always felt strongly about them and wanted to know more, and actually can quite often remember feeling that I didn't have access to as much information and knowledge about them as I wanted. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So then can you describe the process from being in year 12 to deciding to go to the army?
Well, I didn't go straight away.
Yeah.
So when I finished year 12, I really wanted to go study more about Judaism. As I said, this was something that I was looking for, and I felt I didn't have access to the extent that I wanted. And I wanted to go to a yeshiva. And my parents weren't particularly initially wrapped with the idea, and ultimately agreed to let me go on B'nai Akiva's program because it was a program run from Australia, and they wanted a phone number in Australia they could call. So I did that kind of by default, and ended up going to Gush Etzion, which is a very, an extremely prestigious, high standard academic yeshiva that I entered in with a base point of close to 0, which was a pretty extreme learning curve, a bit of a shock, but it was really, really good for me. Came back to Australia, did a bachelor's degree, then went to the army. Yeah. Yeah.
What's an experience that really shocked you?
It shocked me. The very first day that I was in the army. So you start off, you go to a place called Tel Shomer, which is a large base in the center of the country, which is like the induction base. And you wake up that morning and you are a free person. And you walk through the gates, and it becomes very apparent very quickly that you are no longer a free person. And I remember that initial shock, just like, my mum was actually in Israel at the time, and she actually came with me to the base. It was very kind of her, and said goodbye, and I'm like hugging my mum, and all's good. And then I walk through these gates, and all of a sudden, it gets pretty intense pretty quickly. And then got on the bus to our first base in the north of the country, and I just remember this little voice in the back of my head saying, "What the hell have you done?"
And then after that, did it set in, or was it more?
Yeah, listen, it had ups and downs, but the human being regulates to almost any environment they're in, I think, and pretty quickly things that seemed pretty extreme became normalized.
Yeah. And what was the attitude towards religiousness in the army?
So it's interesting. I had the opportunity to serve in a predominantly observant unit. Didn't want to do it because I didn't want to be in an exclusively observant environment. I wanted to be kind of in a broader, just general Israeli context. And I ended up in the unit that I was being the only observant person. Yeah. So I went from one extreme option to the other. The respect for the individual as an individual in a military is not high. right? That's the nature of it. Within that context, I would have to say that the respect for religion and observance was quite admirable, in the sense that when it was feasible from an operational perspective to do so, nobody impinged upon my ability to observe the basics. You couldn't do anything beyond the basics. Time doesn't allow it, and circumstances otherwise. But in terms of during training, for example, being able to pray 3 times a day, that is respected, but not necessarily when you're operational. As you can imagine, that isn't always possible. But overall, yeah, reasonable.
And as an Australian, how were they welcoming?
So I don't think anybody understood what an Australian meant. I had people who understood that I was from Austria. Quite often, but I think most people presumed I was from somewhere in America called Australia. And I even remember there was one gentleman who would imitate me by putting on an American accent, which I was like, make fun of my accent, but let it be mine, at least. So I think they just lumped me with American. Yes. Yeah.
And then after the army, did you stay in Israel?
Yes, I stayed in Israel for a couple more years. And I studied and worked and did a few other things, and it's interesting because you would think that you would get a good window into Israel by being in the army, but you're in a different country. Yeah, you're in a parallel existence. So I actually learnt a lot about individual Israeli people and about one element of Israeli life. You don't actually see Israel, even though you're going all over the country. I got a much deeper grasp of Israel, I think, maybe even after the army than in it. Or a complementary grasp, yeah.
And then how do we get from Israel back to Australia to teaching?
So I eventually decided to move back, and I don't think I ever considered education as a career when I was younger. And I think that is actually a positive. I don't think that it's ideal for people to go straight from being a student to being a teacher. You need to have had life experience first. I enrolled in a Master's of Teaching at Melbourne University, studied that, really enjoyed it, started my first job at Yesodei Torah where I taught for 4 years and really enjoyed that. Did a Master's of Education Administration at the same time, and here I am. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Somehow convincing my wife to go on our honeymoon to a 2-week tour from Alexandria in the north of Egypt to the Sudanese border, her agreeing, and then a week and a half in, fleeing the country in the middle of the night. To Turkey, where we were then 100 meters away from a suicide bombing. So, no, I mean, I would say it's strange that I didn't do anything, I was just present. But
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a good one, I think.
Yeah.